So thank you so much for having us today. I'm having the Women's Business Development Center today. I'm Karen Goldner. I'm the Managing Director of Established Business Services with the Women's Business Development Center. We're based in downtown Chicago. We serve 9 Midwestern states. This program today was that the deck I'm going to be using is a partnership that we did with the Chicago Minority Supplier Development Council. So it's very sort of minority woman focused. As Jeremy stated in his program, the LGBT chamber or the LGBT certification is kind of a third option here. There's also veteran certification. So although the word, you're going to see the word minority a lot, it is not only for minority businesses that I'm going to be talking. Okay. And I'm also not going to talk too much about government procurement today. I'm going to focus more on corporate. Part of that is because of time, and also the minority and women and then veterans are generally accepted in most government certifications. The LGBT certification, not quite as universal. We were very happy to be able to support the LGBT chamber, as was the Chicago Minority Supplier Development Council, to try to get the city of Chicago to move forward with that. But partly just because of that and because of time, I'm going to focus more on corporate today. So here's the thing: if you needed a sign that you should, look at expanding your company into corporate contracting as a way to further develop, this is the sign. Okay, so we're going to be talking about how to go after these kind of contracts. So there's a wide variety of stuff and services that corporate America buys. I mean, here's just some kind of examples, right? Everything from stuff that's very commodity focused to services and everything in between. So we're going to talk about opportunities, how you can define your offer. Oops, sorry about that. What supplier inclusion, supplier diversity means, certification briefly, the bidding process, and then some resources to help. And I will say that one of those resources is obviously the LGBT chamber. So depending on the stage of your business, you want to think about where you might fit in that corporate contracting space. So if you're in the ideation stage, you really want to think more in terms of building the foundation for your company. Jeremy said something that was really important when he talked about the structure of ownership, because that 51% is true for all types of certifications: veteran, woman, minority, and then obviously he talked about the LGBT. So if you are starting this business with a business partner, you might want to position yourself as the 51% owner. I will also say that certification doesn't just have to do with ownership, it has to do with operational and legal control as well. So if I set up a business that's a construction business that I own 51% of with a male partner who's got a lot of business acumen in construction and experience, and I do not have that experience, we're going to have trouble getting certified as a woman-owned business, even though I own the 51%. If you are a relatively new business, and there's nothing magical about 0 to 3 years, it's just kind of to position in the middle. It may be that subcontracting to large prime contractors who are doing business with extremely large corporations might be a good way for you to get your foot in the door. If you've been around for a couple of years, you're a marketing company, you do great digital media, you're really not likely to get a direct contract with Allstate. You're just not. They don't know what to do with a small vendor, and they don't want to mess around with a $100,000 contract, because although that would be huge for you, it is nothing to Allstate. So then what you would want to do is figure out, okay, how can you provide those services through another project or contractor to Allstate? And then as you get larger and more established, then getting into the prime contracting can be a really good idea. So short story is they spend a lot, right? So let's talk about the corporate contracting. Just looking at this picture, right? What did they buy? And there's obviously all the stuff in here, but then also thinking about, what they talk about in this conference room and some of the things that are subcontracted. As I showed the little example earlier, corporate America buys almost everything. And frankly, over the last 25 years has begun outsourcing a lot more of things that they used to buy in person. I mean, if you were a security guard at a GE plant in 1950, you were employed by GE. You are no longer employed by GE. If you're a security person, you're working for a private company. Okay, so there's a few reasons people ask, why do corporations invest in supplier inclusion or supplier diversity? The words mean the same thing. And here's, some of the examples, right? That it's that this is what corporate America is trying to get out of you as suppliers. It is important, though, to recognize that the fact that you are a diverse firm, whether you're LGBT owned, woman owned, minority owned, veteran owned, by itself is typically not terribly important to them, just to be blunt. All things being equal, it can be a differentiator, and you can use that certification as a way to demonstrate that you can do these and other things, these being the things that are kind of listed on the screen. But just by itself, that it's not going to go anywhere. So you really want to be able to use your certification and your diverse status as a way to sort of launch into the conversation about what you can do for your customer, what problems you can solve for them. And so you want to focus on, what do you do exceptionally well, right? There's probably a lot of things that you can do, but when you're going after opportunities, you really want to focus on what you can be, the greatest in the world at, or at least closest to the greatest in the world, as opposed to the stuff that you could do if you needed to. That's how you can start the relationship. And then you can expand that relationship and grow it by showing that there's other things that you can do. Or if your customer says, I know that we're buying digital media services from you, but what we really need to do is figure out how to take that media and sell it or use it, to communicate via email or something like that. And you say, well, yeah, we could do that too. And here, we'll show you how. That's how you can take an existing customer and grow that relationship. But if you just go to the prospect before they're a customer and say, well, we can do all these hundreds and hundreds of things, they're going to tend to not believe you. They want you to focus on what you can be great at. So the capability statement, I'm trying to sort of clear off my screen here a little bit. Sorry about that. Is really, you want to focus on deliverables, numbers, concrete examples, not just, well, we're fabulous or we have great customer service, right? When you're communicating to your prospects about what you do, I mean, who's going to say that they have terrible customer service? Yeah, we don't really care so much about our customers, whatever, right? Nobody's going to say that. And so that's not a differentiator. You want to be able to say, well, we respond to our customers within X period of time. And because of that, we have been able to reduce their costs by some number. Or what are the tangible, concrete examples? And to the extent that you can quantify that stuff, that will be very beneficial for you. Buyers, are numbers people typically, and they want to see that you care about those numbers too, and that you can demonstrate them. So you want to think about, what are your core competencies in explaining your value, right? So here's just, 3 different examples, obviously. And so not only are we a printing company, right? People think, well, I mean, that word can mean lots of different things to lots of different people, right? But you want to say, these are the things that we do a great job of. And like, just, I'm using the offset printing example. If there are sizes that you can print because of some equipment you have that are particularly, odd sizes or large or, something unusual, you want to be able to say that. That might not be necessary in a given job, but if you are going to be responding to some kind of proposal or working on a project where those odd sizes are important, then that's super helpful to know, right? So the the other thing I would say, talking about this AI development, right? And this is it's true for everything, but it's especially true if you're in a technology field, an IT type of field. Nobody really understands what any of this stuff means, right? I mean, most of us don't. So, and a lot of times buyers won't necessarily. And so using words that are meaningful to the buyers when you are defining yourself for whether you're applying for LGBT certification or women or minority or whichever, or whether you're registering in the portals that you're going to be registering in for different corporations, use as many keywords as you can, because it'll help you pop up in searches much more easily. So again, supplier diversity, D&I, supplier inclusion, these are all words that basically mean the same thing in this space. These are folks who are not typically buyers. They typically don't buy anything. It's not always true, but it is almost always true. Their job is to serve as a resource to buyers within their corporations, okay? So you need to make an impression on them so that they feel confident, not only that you can deliver the goods or services that that your business sells, but just to be blunt, that you're not going to embarrass them in front of a buyer, that you can make a great presentation, that you will present well, that, and all of these things sound a little condescending and maybe even insulting, but every single person who has worked in the supplier diversity world for more than about 3 hours has a horror story about a supplier that they went to bat for who just did a terrible job in the presentation, or didn't have the information that they needed or whatever. And all these supplier diversity folks have within their organizations is their credibility. And, a buyer who's used to buying from a Fortune 500 supplier is going to be a little nervous about talking to even a $10 million company, and to say nothing of companies that are smaller, right? They're going to be a little bit, it's like, these people may be a little risky. And so the supplier diversity people may only get one shot at referring a vendor to that particular buyer. And if that vendor blows it, the buyer's never going to call the supplier diversity person again. So I say all that to help you frame how you're positioning yourself. You have to be a secure, safe option for the supplier diversity person and for the buyer, because it's unlikely that you can be great enough to mitigate the fact that they're scared that you might not even be able to deliver, right? I mean, if you print the best signs on earth, but your company isn't able to print the signs, well, they haven't really gotten any signs, have they? So they might be willing to spend even a little more money or deal with a slightly less amazing sign company that they are comfortable is going to deliver the signs. So there's that basic level of performance that you need to be able to demonstrate. And part of how you do that is by talking about the other customers you've worked for. And again, back to what I said a bit ago about having numbers that can demonstrate how you do a great job. So obviously, Jeremy has talked about the certification topic, the 51% ownership. And I will say that, we have the word here, vetting. Certification is just a pain in the butt. I mean, there's just really not a way to say it more honestly than that. The reason that corporate America works with the LGBT Chamber and the WBDC and the Chicago Minority Supplier Development Council and the Veterans Business, NAVOBA, however, I always forget what NAVOBA stands for, it's the Veterans Group, is because they are confident that we have a process that will show integrity in terms of proving that, Missy owns Missy's business and that Missy's not just a front for somebody else, right? So in order to do that, we have to look at all of these different documents. So I know it's challenging for a lot of small business owners, and it's not why you went into business, but it will help you be able to then start to to get that access to corporate America. And frankly, I've heard supplier diversity people say that they kind of like that the certification requires all these documents, because it means that the small business owner is able to handle it, to handle that level of paperwork. You're not going to sell to corporate America without a lot of paperwork. And so, you know, if that's not your jam, then you probably need to find another market. So you want to be able to just, you know, demonstrate by certification, really, in a way that you're able to handle at least that much kind of paperwork. So, so this is again the certification, and let's look at LaTanya. And Jeremy made this comment too. If you can qualify for multiple certifications, and just looking at LaTanya, we can decide that she could qualify as a woman-owned business and as a minority-owned business. She also may be LGBT. She also may be a veteran. Why would she want to get all four? What's the benefit to her? And I will say that there's both, like, yeah, not so much of a benefit, and then there's arguments why you would want to do it. Corporate America tends to look at all of its diverse spending in a giant bucket, and they kind of put it all in one bucket, and then they say, we spent X million or billion or whatever dollars with diverse firms. But from time to time, they'll focus on one or another kind of category. And those decisions are made because some vice president thinks that they should be. You know, I mean, there's not really a predictability to that. The other thing that probably is more important is, well, and I guess if LaTanya was, you know, only certified as a woman-owned company, and all of a sudden they decided, well, we really want to focus on veterans, and she is also a veteran, but she's not certified, then she's going to kind of lose out. But also, if a lot of these relationships that you want to start developing, when we're in more in-person world, which we were, you know, on our way back to, hopefully, if LaTanya is able to go to basically 4 sets of events to meet more or less the same people, that will help her develop those relationships much more quickly than if she's only going to the minority events or to the women events or to what have you. So I've talked briefly about certification, and if you're looking to get WBE, Women-Owned Business Certified, that's us, MBE, Chicago Minority Supplier Development Council. I do want to say that the WeBank rules that we follow, Women's Business Enterprise National Council, and we do have transgender people who are certified. All you have to do is show some government issued ID that demonstrates that your gender is female. So that could be a driver's license, if your Social Security paperwork has been redone, or if your passport says, so it doesn't have to be the birth certificate. And sometimes I know people do get their birth certificates reissued. Okay, and there are scholarships from time to time. We have a program that'll pay for half of the certification. CMSDC from time to time does. Obviously, you heard about the LGBT chambers. So it's always worth reaching out to ask before you apply, just to see if there is something that's available to help you out. The fees range depending on the organization. For a company under $1 million, our application fee is $350, just to give you kind of an example. Okay, so as I said, certification is not kind of an entitlement or whatever. I mean, and just being certified is not going to be enough of a reason for you to get a contract, but it can help you get in the door. It can help be a differentiator. And then again, thinking of the reasons why corporations, large corporations, want to buy from small, diverse firms. They're looking for that problem solving. They're looking for that innovation. They're looking at people who can more directly kind of represent their consumers, depending on who their customers and consumers are. So lots of different reasons, and you can use that certification as kind of a way to help begin to tell that story. But typically, you don't want to lead with the certification like, I'm Karen, I'm a WBE certified accountant, right? No, nobody cares about that. What is my, I do great audit service and I specialize in the healthcare audit space, and I'm talking to somebody at Advocate Aurora Health. And, through our audit services, we have been able to not only provide the kind of audit, reports that are needed, but we also have helped our customers be able to identify sources of waste that they can solve. And last year, we actually did an audit for a hospital chain that was able to save 3% of their, on their XYZ spend, right? And I'm WBE certified, right? That's more of a compelling story than just I'm a WBE accountant. So some of these pictures that you've been seeing obviously are clip art, and that's fine. But Melanie Ray is an actual real person. And she had done a lot of, she's obviously minority owned and a woman owned business. She's in California. She had done a lot of work for the WBDC in some of our other educational programs that we developed, or curriculum, and that's what her business is she's a curriculum developer. And these are her quotes. So, and she has been able to grow her business significantly after having gotten certified. She's now doing work with Walgreens and others, a lot of utility companies and so forth. So this is real. This is not just a fake. Okay. So, this is actually a pretty typical looking kind of program in real life. And all of our different organizations have these kinds of events in person. You can get great insight into corporations of what they're really looking for, what their strategic initiatives are, the kind of information you really need in order to make an effective pitch. You can, start collecting business cards and reaching out to people and so forth. And you can also then meet other diverse business owners. Often a good source of business for you is, or other small businesses, right? Just depending on what it is that you're selling. And that's why, groups like the LGBT Chamber and are particularly good at helping people make connections like that. Just looking at the clock. Okay, we're doing fine. So Jerry here is an actual supplier inclusion professional. And what she talks about here is so valuable, exactly what she's saying. So who are you project ready, right? What can you do now? What do you have the capacity to do now? And then what makes you different? And that difference needs to be defined from the perspective of the customer, right? The customer's value. So I have this pen here, right? You might not be able to see it because of the back screen, but just, it's a pen and it's black. There you go. So somebody else might make a pen that has, orange plastic on it, right? So if all I need is for the pen to write, then I don't care whether it's orange plastic or black plastic or whatever, right? So just the fact that something is different, you want to think about it more as a benefit to your customer. So what are the things about your company that your customers right now would say are the reasons that they use you? Okay, so if you make hair care products, right? So the fact that you have, these different ingredients, that's a feature, right? It describes your products, that they're made with all natural ingredients. What's the benefit? Well, it's healthier, and then obviously, it makes your hair shinier maybe, or, whatever the benefits are. So that's what the consumer wants. That's what the customer wants, as opposed to just sort of describing whatever it is that you do. So, and that's hard. I mean, you tend to want to go back to features. But you need to continually hone your message so that you're focusing on differentiators as benefits. If the customer doesn't care whether the pen is black or orange, because all they care about is the ink color, then talking about that you have all these different colors of pens is really a waste of time, right? They're just not going to be interested. They're going to, what is it that they want to know? And what they want to know is how do they benefit from using your products and services. So this is the thing you want to talk about, right? Is how would you introduce your company in a way that is relevant to Jerry? That's what you want to think about. Relevance to the listener, relevance to the buyer or the supplier diversity professional. And what makes you different from other vendors? Again, focused on what the consumer or the customer cares about. So here's some good examples. And I'm a little afraid that I might have a shadow in here. So I'm going to just try and minimize some of this stuff so that it doesn't bother as much. So we've got, intellectual property. So let me just use patents as an example. I have a patented process that does X, Y, Z. Well, the fact that it's patented may be irrelevant to the customer, right? But the fact that you're the only one who can do it. And so what this process does is it provides XYZ benefit to you. And because it's patented, I'm the only one who can sell it to you, right? Sales volume, geographic service area. This is important, especially for small businesses, because as I mentioned at the beginning or earlier in the conversation, there's a lot of fear, I'll just use that word, on the part of buyers who are used to dealing again with Fortune 500, Fortune 100 suppliers who might have all kinds of problems, and there's but chances are they're going to be able to get the stuff to the buyer, right? I mean, with the last year being maybe an exception. But if they're just talking to a smaller business, they may not know where you sell or where you could sell. Or they may assume that it's just, you working out of your basement when actually you're running a $20 million company that has hundreds of customers, right? So you want to be specific about that. And similarly, if you are only focused in a particular geographic area, there's nothing wrong with that, but you should say that on your website. Okay, so if you are a janitorial service and you serve the Chicagoland area, then you should say that, because some buyer from Atlanta may see this and it's like, oh, these people look good and they're certified and that would be great. And then they call you and it's just a complete waste of time. So you want to give as much information like that to you. You kind of make some assumptions. I know that I only sell in the Chicagoland area. That's where you want to, what you want to be able to say. So sometimes it's important to limit what you advertise that you do to whatever's real, and you can always change it later, right? But especially with project or with services that are very employee specific. I mean, yes, if you're a big janitorial firm in Chicagoland, you could grow into Atlanta, but you're not going to be able to provide those services to Jerry to this point tomorrow, right? Because you're going to have to start an operation. And reputation, years in business is important, again, because it helps with that stability. And influence is an interesting one. Depending on the industry that you're in. So I have been in some calls with Vistra Energy, which is a large utility, and they do power generation in Illinois, but they also they do stuff across the country. They're pretty upfront saying, one of the things that we look for in vendors as a value add is if you have good relationships with the industry in Illinois, that is helpful to us. So, that can be something that can be useful to talk about. So here's Carmen, who is a forensic accounting person. And she wants to be able to recommend a solution for, so So then that kind of begs the question, well, what's the problem that her prospect suffers? You can look at publicly traded companies have an enormous amount of information that is available. You can look at their annual reports. You can actually listen online to their investor calls. If you go into the website of any Fortune 500 company, well, any publicly traded company, actually, there's going to be a section that's called, investors or for investors or something like that. And if you look in there, that's where you can find their annual reports. Typically, these organizations do a quarterly investor call with the CEO and the CFO. Those are typically recorded and they are typically available on the website. And so you can listen to those and you can find out, well, we're, moving into the Pacific Northwest now in our company, whatever, right? I mean, you'll be able to, you may find out at this time they're talking about, well, we're bringing all of our employees back in by September 1st, or we're not, or we're going to be doing this or that. There's lots of information that you can find out during those calls about how the business is actually going. That can be very helpful to you in identifying what sort of problems, challenges, opportunities they may have where you could be helpful. Then responding to a request, you want to make sure that you are registered in their vendor portals. And those are awful. Those are awful. Registering vendor portals is awful. It's not quite as bad as getting certified, but it's close. You know what? You just have to do it because that's where their buyers are going to go first cut to find vendors. And again, always looking at this from the buyer's perspective, whether this is something that you're recommending just, through kind of trying to develop these relationships with the supplier diversity people and so forth, or whether you're responding to a request. And I would also encourage you to find someone in your life, in your company, who can be kind of the devil's advocate. So you may have come up with this amazing thing that some corporation should do differently in order to be successful. And you may be right, okay? You may be right. But what you want to be able to do is kind of market test that or reality test it with somebody who's like, well, why would Allstate completely change their business model or whatever, right? So you want to think about how you would effectively pitch the solution, not just what the solution is. So a capability statement, and sometimes people call it a one-pager, sometimes they call it a value proposition statement. It is a one-pager, or sometimes you can do 2 pages because you have a front and back that talks about, it really just describes what you do. Sometimes people call it a resume for your business, and that's not entirely wrong, but it should be very, very fact-based. So it's going to have your contact information. It's going to have the NAICS codes of the types of industries that you're in. It's going to have, kind of past performance or prior customers or major projects in very short little bullet points, recognizing that people don't read, they look, right? People don't read a long paragraph. They're just going to look at a document and they want to be able to pick out the salient points. And then what are your core competencies? So I'm a printer and I, do these different kinds of printing. And then what are my differentiators? I have some kind of process that I keep files that I can then manage your projects for you. I can do this, I can do that, different things, again, benefits to the customer that I can provide. Those are differentiators. And the whole part of a capability statement, the differentiators are always the hardest part. And the good news is you don't need 10, maybe 3, right? But reasons why they should stop doing business with their current vendor and start doing business with you. Because it is extremely unlikely that frankly, that almost any customer, but certainly a large customer, does not currently buy the stuff you're selling, right? They just do. And so you're trying to displace another vendor. And so you need to be able to really clearly and succinctly articulate why they should stop buying from brand X and start buying you. Oh, you know what? I sort of skipped over a bunch of other words. So statement of qualifications is more of a government one. We're not going to talk about that. Request for information. Most of the rest of these are really more government terms. So we're going to just zip over that right now. So if so you meet somebody at an LGBT chamber event, a supplier diversity person for corporation X, and they're kind of interested. You give them your elevator pitch that tells them what you do, who you do it for, and why you do it better. And they say, oh, okay, well, you know what? I think that we might be looking for a vendor in your category coming up. Can you give me some more information? So here's what they mean by that is a capability statement or a statement of qualifications. And again, don't get overwhelmed with the terminology. What matters is that you have this kind of one pager. Never go print hundreds of these one pagers, because you're just in the same way that if you have a resume and you're applying for jobs, right, you would always kind of tailor it to fit the specific employer you're going after. You want to make sure that your capability statement is kind of focused on that particular industry. Maybe you've sold in lots of different industries, but you're talking to somebody in utilities in this particular instance. So you really want to make sure you're kind of focused more on your utility customer history as opposed to what you've done in healthcare or something else. So and corporations do requests for information from time to time. So let's just say that a customer is looking at getting a new IT service, managed service provider, right? So if they do a request for information, that's not really a bid. That is, they just want to find out who's out in the marketplace, who are other companies that we might be able to go to get services. Pre-bid meetings is really more government than the corporate sector, but if there's ever any kind of meeting like that, you always want to go. It's a great opportunity to meet other potential vendors, some of whom might be more like prime contractors. But that's more in the government space. Okay, a request for a quote or a request for proposal is going to be more specific, and this is more like, yeah, now we know that we need a new managed service provider, and so now we're going to go actually ask people to sort of bid on the project. A request for a quote is normally used more in a commodity type situation, or where the service can be very easily defined, and a proposal then is going to be a little bit more a little harder to compare apples to apples, or because maybe they want to have a new training program, right? So my training program proposal might be different than somebody else's, as opposed to if I sell pens and what they want is a quote on pens. That's pretty, apples to apples. That's what I mean by that. Okay, so we're going to skip through the government procurement piece. But I do want to say, and I will put in the chat when we're done here, that we have some resources at the Women's Business Development Center who can help with government contracting. Those services are generally available at no charge. And I'm going to zip over that. NAICS codes are important. You get certified for a certain type of thing. And I kind of made this, the example at earlier in my comments about how we have, my construction company, right? Well, that would be, I would need to have these construction NAICS codes, North American Industrial Classification codes. and I wouldn't get certified for that, but I could have that same exact structure of a company that I own 51% of with a male business partner, and I could get a business consulting type of NAICS codes because that's my background. So that's why the NAICS code matters. And then well, I think we'll zip over this. We've already talked about capability statements, and here we go. So I am going to now finish up by getting off of sharing, and would love to spend the last 10 minutes answering any questions you have. I know that this was a ton of stuff, and I'm also going to put my information in the chat, and then our website, and then the services that we provide: government contracting, certification, and corporate contracting, and access to capital are the main sorts of areas. Okay, and Jeremy, if it's okay with you, people can come off mute, or if you want to type your question, whichever.
Yes, definitely. Feel free to, again, to type or ask your question off mute. Kind of just based on how the day is going. I don't know if we might not do the final session from 2 to 2:30 if we can ask some questions during these times. And so,
yeah.
Yeah,
you know what? Actually, Stephanie just asked about the slides. Actually, Jeremy has the deck. Jeremy can send that deck out if are you able to do that, Jeremy? And then there's also kind of a handout takeaway thing that Jeremy has as well. So I will leave it to him to get both of those documents to everybody.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Because the government stuff would take another probably half an hour to do it with any justice to it. So.
Well, a couple of thoughts while people maybe think of a question. I love the note that you made about being able to speak to the benefits and not the feature. I think that's something that people don't necessarily think about or have that understanding mentally to be able to make that happen. So I think that was a really great suggestion and something that I'll be sure to keep in mind as well. We did get a question: is there any way we could gain access to the recording and watch it again? Yes, we will be posting these sessions to our YouTube page, so you will be able to go back to watch this session.
Fabulous.
Another thing that you said, which I thought was a really great suggestion, which I had never heard anyone suggest before, which was joining on those investor calls as a way to be able to learn more about what's happening with the company, as well as also where they're headed. That was such a good suggestion. And, so often, people ask, how do I, find out what's going on or be in the know? And that seems like definitely the best place to make that happen. So definitely hope people will take advantage of that.
Yeah, I had never thought about that either. And then actually it was somebody from Walgreens who had suggested that a couple years ago. I heard him say that and I was like, that is a great idea. And because, for instance, this was just a kind of so if you read in the paper, and this was like 3 years ago, but Walgreens was closing all these stores, right? So you could read that and take the information being, or the conclusion being, oh my gosh, they're downsizing, right? Well, the reality of it is that every year Walgreens closes a small number of low performing stores, just because that's what they do every year, right? And they had also just merged with another chain. And so there were situations where you'd have a Walgreens store on one side of the street and this other chain store on the other side, right? So they're going to close one of those stores. So that was where the number got so big. And you wouldn't have known that from reading just the normal business press necessarily about it, but you would have figured that out if you had heard it in the investor call. And so that's a whole different argument. That's not a, oh my gosh, Walgreens is shrinking, they're in trouble. That's more of a, because of this consolidation. And you know what? My management contracting or consulting services, we have done a great job of helping other companies, not merging at the top level because they've got that figured out, or they don't, either way, but they're not going to ask me about it. But I've done a great job of being able to work with kind of the middle and the line managers and help them change into a new kind of culture. Great opportunity for me to do it. That's what I'm going to do. So just kind of an example of how, of the kinds of information and why that information matters so much. As opposed to just my going to Walgreens and saying, I do management training. I would love to do management training for you. Of course I would, right? But why would they love me to do the management training for them, right?
Great framing. Thank you for that, Karen. Doesn't look like anyone has any other questions at the moment. So I hope everyone wrote down Karen's email address. I will share it, or connect you to her LinkedIn and our wrap-up email as well. Huge thank you, Karen. I know you took time out of your vacation today to be here with us. And so we greatly, greatly appreciate your sacrifice.
It was a pleasure to be with you all. Greetings from Omaha, I guess I should have said. And yeah, I will stick around for a few minutes if there's other questions or anything like that in the chat. And Jeremy, thank you so much for including us. We really value our relationship with you guys. Thanks.
Same here. Perfect. Well, I will